Okay, so we've talked about the Renaissance in the southern part of Europe. Now let's talk about it in the northern part of Europe because we're still talking about the same time period. But obviously, while there was high Renaissance down in the southern part, especially in Italy, um, this was a movement that was sweeping across all of Europe. So we're going to talk about the north. Um, Now, obviously, the the north didn't have as much of an impact on us as the south did. We don't we still have great painters, we still have great thinkers, um, but it was a very different feel in the north. And Bruges was probably the hub of the movement in the north. This is the Flemish city. Um, the Medici banking interests in the north were hubbed out of here. Um, and it had in addition to the nobility, it had a very strong merchant class, and really the merchant class drove the Renaissance more than the nobility did here. They were very much the supporters of the arts. Now, whereas in the South, the church uh, was a very strong force, very strong focus. I mean, it was Italy after all. Um, in the North, the church was regarded with a lot of mistrust. The corruption that was going on in the church, especially with indulgences, was viewed as this horrible uh, disintegration of morality and values. And so there was this sense of despondency in the North, and this translated into the art that you just don't see in the South. Um, in Bruges, painting was probably after cloth making, it was the largest commodity. There was a very strong guild of image makers that did a variety of work, everything from sculpture painting to little pamphlets. And it was one of the more powerful guilds, actually. Um, Oil painting had been practiced for several centuries. So by the middle of the 1400s, an interesting thing happened. Bruges, if you look on the map, Bruges had a port, but that port ended up clogged with silt, which is that really lush dirt from the river bottoms that ended up making its port inaccessible. And they didn't have the dredging technology to get that silt out at the time. And so Antwerp, another city in the region, started taking over as kind of the hub of culture in the area about that time. Um, in Germany, we see printing presses coming out. And these printing presses, one of the things they could do is they could take simple artwork and they could reproduce it en masse. And so some of the simpler styles of art ended up being popular because they were able to be easily reproduced upon the printing press. In Cologne, we had a lot of painting, illuminated manuscripts. In France, um, the in Southern Europe, the important patrons were the more politically powerful families, whereas in the North, you end up with these merchant classes, okay, who end up building up financial reservoirs, and they were the main patrons. So you kind of end up with these two different uh, groups of backers um, in the in between the North and the South. If you look on 563, you'll see one of the examples of some of this northern artwork, the Merode altarpiece. It's a three-part work or a triptych, right? That can fold open depending on how it's styled. Um, on the far left, you see the altarpiece's patrons, the people who paid for this thing to be made. Engelbrecht of Mechlin and his wife kneeling. Notice how they are very common, ordinary people. Okay, and this or ordinary looking people, and this is a vast difference between what we saw in the South, where the you really don't see that humbleness. Okay, that humbleness of portrayal that we see more in the North. Um, so and then we see, of course, the Mary uh, reading a book, um, and this. this feeling of just simplicity pervades northern artwork. It's very homey. It's very plain. Okay. Um, Mary is portrayed kind of as a Flemish housewife. Joseph is a carpenter and owner of the house. Um, and they're not portrayed as from their time. They're portrayed as modern Flemish people. So the thought being this makes it easier for people to relate to these stories of the past if they're portrayed in a way that they can understand it. Time kind of collapses in on itself as modern means ancient. The other thing is that, whereas in the South we see these massive giant works, this is small. I mean, it's about 2 square feet. It's portable, right? You can take it to where you need it. And spending that much time and that much energy on a smaller piece really wasn't the style of the South. They were painted huge. They were embedded in the walls, right? They were designed to show the glory of God through within the church, right? Not this simple thing that a farmer would have and be able to carry. Um, the one thing that we do see is this blending of color and texture that provides just a real amazing depth um, and transparency that is really unique to the North. Um, in the other thing we see that in the North that we really don't see in the South is how uniquely personal things are. The works in the South were designed to glorify the church, to glorify God, to be this statement, right? In the North, we see a lot of pieces that are personal, right? They're humble. They're more oriented towards the individual that paid for them. They're about the relationship. Okay. Um, Now, we do see some large pieces. Jan van Eyck, in Kent and Bruges. Um, this is a piece that just look, it's gorgeous. They're on 566, right? Um, this was completed by Jan and his brother Hubert. Um, the patrons are depicted life size. Okay, at the bottom of the closed doors, flanking. Right, you see them there on the left and the right on the bottom. John the Baptist and John the Evangelist. Um, and now when we talk about humbleness, that doesn't go through in all cases. The inscription is just amazing. Hubert van Eyck, the most famous painter ever known, started this work of art at the request of Jodocus Vij. His brother Jan, who was second in art, finished the monumental commission. With this verse, the donor consigns the work to your charge. Okay, um, and Hubert, the older brother, yeah, he never really came to the prominence that John did. Um, we see the Ghent altarpiece up above there on 567. Again. The ability for these wings to open, right, so that the whole thing can be seen. They were closed most of the time. This is a polytich, right, constructed from multiple panels. Um, if you look there on the upper right there on 567, sorry, sometimes I get my hand in the way, on 567, you see the woman with kind of the slightly protruding belly. This was actually the considered to be the attractive figure of the time. It's very details, the hair especially. You can see every strand of hair here. And the nudity just seems very natural. On 568, we see Giovanni Arnolfini and his wife. And again, it's very individual, the personal identity. The The woman there is not actually pregnant. Again, kind of the preferred body form. Green is a suggestion of fertility. And just the detail of Van Eyck, the ability to use texture um, to suggest depth of feeling. Um, the painting really indicates the couple's spiritual and materiality. Like this is an idealization of what people should be like at the time. Okay. One of the things we see, of course, is kind of this depressed form, right? Look there on 572 at these figures. At the time, people really felt that if somebody had a disfigured face or was ugly or something like that, that the ugliness on the outside reflected an ugliness that was already present on the inside. That is, God would make a person physically hideous to indicate that outwardly what the condition of their soul was like. And we see Christ there at the center of several figures that are obviously uh, deformed, right? To indicate how horrible these people were that were perpetrating this offense on Christ. Um, the the pessimism running through this area was very problematic, okay? Because you have normally for example, in the South, bad things happened, people turned to the church. In the North, people looked at how people were buying indulgences for works of art, for papal palaces, etc. Back in Rome, well, at least in Italy, they could go see these things, right? In the North, you're not going to see these things. So you're having money taken out of your region, sent to Rome to build these huge, massive things for the church that provide no beauty in your life. And so the church was viewed with a great deal of suspicion. Um, and that reflects in the artwork. And this is why a lot of times we see these types of work coming specifically from the North. Um, and this piece by Hieronymus Bosch is designed to start this conversation. It's designed to have people talk about who these people are, why they are committing these acts against God, why they are disfigured. Um, the body was regarded as very sinful in this region. Okay, it was a source of sin, whereas in the South, the body was celebrated, right? We saw in Titian, for example, how the beauty of the human form was celebrated. Um, but in the North, it was very much viewed with suspicion. For example, we don't see the sensual nudes that we see in the South. Um, there was a great deal of skepticism, not just with the peasants, but with the aristocracy as well. They didn't trust Rome. France, for example, went back and forth, warring with Rome and with the Holy Roman Empire during these times. The Marguerite de Navarre, who was the sister of the French King Francis I, her brother was imprisoned by the Holy Roman Empire, Charles V, and she ruled when he was gone, when he was in prison. She ran France, and she was a very big investor in the arts and trying to bring about the Northern Renaissance, right? Um, she was a writer of her own, told numerous. She had the Heptameron, okay, which was modeled on Boccaccio's Decameron, which we already discussed. And basically, it was a story a day, which also kind of follows the idea of 1001 Arabian Nights. And the pieces that the works of literature that she brought about are very much in the vein of Hieronymus Bosch's work. That is, they're designed not just to be appreciated, but designed to start a conversation, designed to get people talking. Her stories are based in the idea of wealth and money, which was a big deal. Wealth and money is always a big deal, but especially in the North, where you have all this money going to going south to Rome, um, there becomes this huge mistrust of class. The peasants didn't trust the aristocracy. They didn't because the aristocracy just taxed them. They didn't trust the merchants because they felt the merchants were robbing from them by overcharging them, and they didn't trust the church because the church really wasn't doing anything that was beneficial for them other than selling indulgences and taking their money and building beautiful things hundreds, if not thousands, of miles away. So you end up with some of these peasant revolts. Peasants revolted in 1358 due to the tax burden from the Hundred Years' War. There was a peasant revolt in England in 1381, another one in Germany in the Peasant War in 1524 and 1526. And so there's just simply not the relationship that we see in some other parts of the world between the various social classes, right? We talked about the Schola in the last chapter. So you had the various classes, right, in Venice, but then you had the Schola that cut through all these classes, and there was nothing equivalent. In fact, the word peasant comes from the word pagan, such as myself, and which because peasants were thought to be ungodly, right? Okay, let's see here. We have a lot of the tapestries. If you look, for example, at the Garden of Earthly Delights, there on 576, we have these massive works of just beautifully woven pieces. Now, what they would do is they would actually sew these, and then they'd put silver and gold thread through these tapestries for color, but also to make them beautiful. They'd shimmer a little bit, and to make them even more valuable. But that also would make them, again, valuable. And so during various revolutions, especially the French Revolution in the late 18th century, they were burned. And these were like 30 feet high tapestries that would stretch out, or 30 feet wide, and some of them almost that high. Just gorgeous pieces destroyed just to get to the thread inside. Very sad. I hate when art and literature is destroyed. I'm one of those that still mourns the passing of the great library at Alexandria. Okay, so we see some of these various cities. Cologne, which was the largest city in Germany, about 40,000. And then Nuremberg, Strasbourg, Vienna, Prague, all between 20 and 30,000, which smaller, of course, than Florence, Paris, London, which were all about 100,000. But they are still cultural hubs of the time, despite the fact that they're not these massive places. They still have a thriving merchant class. There's still money coming into these areas, and if you're in a smaller area, it doesn't cost as much to live. And so a lot of times that can lead to more free money for things such as patronage. There on 578, right, we see Matthias Grunwald and his most famous work, the Eisenheim altarpiece, painted from about 1510 to 1515 for the Hospital of the Abbey of St. Andrew, which was actually a place to treat skin diseases. They would treat things such as syphilis, leprosy, ergotism, which is made by eating bad grain if you get a particular fungus, I believe. Yeah. So physical illness was regarded as a reflection of your spiritual life. If you were physically sick, then there was something wrong with your soul, and you had to get your soul right with God before your body could actually be fixed. And so a lot of these places really emphasized spirituality. They would get these pieces to get their patrons to think on God. And it's a very grim piece, right? I mean, look at that there on 579 and how just frightening that is, right? Okay. Women in witchcraft. This is a topic that is close to me in a lot of ways. I think I might have mentioned this at one point in class, but I am pagan. That is my own personal spirituality. And Christianity persecuted paganism's practitioners of the older religions mercilessly for hundreds of years, over 1,000. Um, and there was the fact is, the vast majority of people that they killed actually weren't practitioners at all. They didn't actually practice witchcraft, um, but the accusation was enough. During this time, between 1400 and 1700, probably about 100,000 people were killed. Vast majority of them were women, about 80% were women. Only about 20% were men. And they, anybody who had knowledge um, that could do things, especially, for example, midwives, right? People who helped with birthing. It was men didn't understand giving birth and how that works, and so the practitioners were thought, the midwives who helped give birth were often the victims of accusations of witchcraft. Anything that went wrong in the village, be it multiple births, which was a good thing, or if a crop died, the woman must have done it, and oftentimes they were accused of that. Um, so any type of magic that was practiced, magic, right, was viewed as with suspicion, and it was forbidden to the laity. Although, of course, if you were a member of the church and you did things such as the exorcism of demons, or if you miraculously healed someone, that was okay. But heaven forbid somebody who was not a member of the church should do something considered miraculous. That's witchcraft, even if it was something that was beneficial. Um, we had the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, written by Heinrich Kramer, and who was a complete and total misogynist. Everything that came out of this man's mouth was how evil women were. But it is probably one of the best known texts as far as how to deal with witches. Um, we look, for example, on page 580, right? These witches that, of course, they're nude, and their nudity is meant to convey their perversion and their overt sexuality. Um, there, we we would like to think that this misogyny, this hatred of women, was the exception and not the rule. Uh, it might have been the most extreme account of it, but it taps into a thread of misogyny, of anti-woman, that was very, very prevalent this time. This is just the farthest extreme of it, but the misogyny penetrated all aspects of culture at the time. Um, on 582, we have the woodcut by Albrecht Dürer. Um, And one of the things that's interesting about this, right? We see the overt sensuality in the paintings in the South. Here we still have naked woman, right? And not only that, but look at where the artist drawing the naked woman is sitting. Okay, I mean he's looking right up downtown there. Um, but notice how mathematical this is. Um, as opposed to Titian capturing the depth and the color and the frank gaze, right, straight at the person observing her, the almost invitation, right, or the in Sacred and Profane Love, the painting that we looked at, where you have the woman who's dressed and then the very obviously profane love of the woman who looks exactly like her. This is an artist who is looking through a grid, drawing on a grid, attempting to capture the precise form, even though, regardless of where he's looking, this is just a drawing. He's just doing a drawing. He's trying to capture the human figure. There's nothing sensual about this, despite her nudity, despite where he's sitting. This is simply observation, which is very different than anything we would see in the South at this time. This simply wouldn't have been something um, that were shown. Um, for Durer, creating art was a sacred act meant to draw one closer to God, not to not to just create something to be beautiful. It had to be uh, a spiritual take. Um, one of there on 583, one of the most ardent opponents of the excesses of the church was Erasmus. Um, he was a monk, a humanist scholar, raised in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, um, and he was an educator. This is one of the very first people to take advantage of the ability of the printing press to take knowledge and reproduce it on the printing press. So there were copies upon copies upon copies that could be distributed. Um, and though he was a massive, massive critic of the papacy and the evils of Rome, he stayed dedicated to the church. He felt that you had to fix the problem from the inside. Um, but even his beliefs were challenged by the iconoclasm, which we've talked about before, the willingness to get rid of art that came with the Protestant Reformation. Um, all right, please do your discussion boards, stay caught up, and I'll talk to you soon.